With you. I've had such a great time since I arrived yesterday. What a cracking party you had last night. And passionate worship this morning, joy in the Lord. I couldn't be happier. Just thank you so much. I want to take you all back and your worship team, everybody back to my church down in Hampshire where I live. So, before we start, perhaps I could just read to you from God's Word for a moment. I'll set my timer so I don't go on too long. So this is Psalm 119, verses 9 to 16. How can a young man keep his way pure? By guarding it according to your word. With my whole heart I seek you. Let me not wander from your commandments. I have stored up your word in my heart, that I might not sin against you. Blessed are you, O Lord. Teach me your statutes. With my lips I declare all the rules of your mouth. In the way of your testimonies I delight as much as in all riches. I will meditate on your precepts and fix my eyes on your ways. I will delight in your statutes. I will not forget your word. So Lord Jesus, I just thank you for every single person here, for bringing us here together. Please speak to us in this time together. Please give me clarity. Help us all to understand the times and how we can protect our children and young people and help them to stay pure and to walk in your ways. So I'm aiming to do three things in the next 45 minutes or so. Firstly, to introduce you to Christian Concern and Christian Legal Centre and the landscape as we see things. And then to talk about the particular issues facing Christians in education and talk about your rights as parents and what you can do. So Christian Concern was founded back in 2006. At that time, the government was proposing to outlaw speech which incited religious hatred. This was causing a lot of
Just a quick interruption. Something that we needed to do, which I didn't mention, is to help manage time. While this talk is on, please, if there are questions that we need to take, can all the steward help us distribute slip so we can take questions, if that's all right. So sorry.
No problem. So the government was planning a new law, and this was causing rather a lot of anxiety. And you may remember people like Rowan Atkinson, the comedian, were raising concerns about the risk that the law might be to their work in comedy and satire, in case they might be prosecuted if they make jokes about religion, etc. So probably events then, back in 2006, were the first warnings that free speech in the UK was starting to be squeezed, and that the move away from Judeo-Christian values and the values of the Bible was accelerating. So at Christian Concern, we believe wholeheartedly, and what it says a little bit later in Psalm 119, your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. We believe this is true for every person, whether they know God or do not yet know him. We also believe, as we're told in Romans chapter 1, that everyone knows deep down that they're created by God and can know him. So we believe that it's best for the flourishing of all to live by the Maker's instructions.
Amen.
So this is our vision, to see society transformed at every level by the gospel of Jesus Christ. So we seek to represent and promote Christian values in the public square and to encourage those who espouse them. As a barrister, Andrea, who founded Christian Concern, knew the importance of the law in a nation. Law is often downstream of culture, although sometimes it also influences heavily the direction of culture. Either way, it plays a fundamental role. So she realised there was a need to tackle both culture and law. So as you can see on that slide, our work helps people to take hold of God's promises, such as the one shown there in Romans 1, verses 16 and 17. I trained as a barrister, and I met Andrea when I was a student, so too many years ago. And after working for many years, first I worked at the bar, then I worked teaching law. 2.5 years ago, I started working as a centre manager for CLC. So CLC is part of Christian Concern, and we take forward the vision in the legal arena. So I work alongside 5 other lawyers, and we have 2 legal team assistants, and I'm very pleased to say that one of them is from Nigeria. And we all consider the work to be an honour and a privilege. The Legal Centre is just part of Christian Concern, but in some ways it's the engine room of the whole ministry, because our clients bring to us in microcosm the issues that society faces. So we believe that as Christian lawyers, we're called to be the watchmen on the walls. Our clients are people of faith. Many have got into difficulties because of faith stands they've taken, often in the workplace. Sometimes they've deliberately chosen to make a stand. Often it arises just as part of their normal life and work, because they care about truth and about other people, and their faith gives them confidence and purpose. Regrettably, they increasingly need our help because of the way our culture has been moving. And our clients amaze me every single day with their courage and their faithfulness. And as a result, we often see many of them experiencing great blessing. And their situations sometimes bring publicity, which enables campaigning to be hooked onto them as part of the wider ministry. The most of our clients don't make the national news, but sometimes they do. And if you look out in the press, you will see references to Christian Legal Centre, probably most weeks. But the important thing is that we operate like the NHS. So when someone's in need, our service is free to them. And so the ministry depends entirely on faithful donors up and down the country. Some people who give small amounts and some who give larger. But the people that give regularly are the ones that we rely on the most. So on to our particular topic for this morning as the symposium, as part of your conference. What could be more important than the nurturing and educating of the next generation and being aware of the important issues that they're facing? It's a question that's very close to our hearts at Christian Concern. And we quite recently engaged a head of education because we realised the seriousness of what is happening. And he and his team work tirelessly. And as with other areas in which we work, there's much crossover between us in the legal team and the education team. We have many calls every month from parents, especially those who are anxious about the material their children are being taught, as well as we get contacted regularly by those who work in schools as well, and in education generally, who need our help. So what are the issues facing Christian parents at this moment, at this time in culture, and those who work in education? So I divided this just into 4 areas to talk a little bit about each of them. So the first thing is sex education. The second, pride. The third, transgenderism. And the fourth, I just want to introduce you to a few of our teachers that we work for. So just briefly looking at each one of these. So firstly, sex education. There's currently great concern about the materials being taught in our schools in the UK under the banner of sex education. Miriam Capes MP has been taking up the cudgel with great effect on this in Parliament recently. There's an influential movement known as Sex Positive, which is to introduce what I would say is inappropriately sexualised material to young children. And they have a lot of influence. And of course, there's the ongoing and relentless pushing of LGBT material and material on what's called gender identity in education settings. So on this slide, you can see just a few of the myriad of inappropriate books that are currently being used in our primary schools. So I'll just give you a minute to have a look at that. So there's a vast array of providers of sex education materials, and they're mainly activists. And you can see there just 6 or 7, but there's many more. And schools, especially secondary schools, but some primary schools, are paying these people to come in and indoctrinate our children in the name of education. So this is Calvin and Nikki Watts. They live over in the east of the country, and they got in touch with us last year when a particular book was read to their 7-year-old daughter at their Church of England primary school.
That's the sad thing.
We helped them complain, and when they didn't get anywhere with the school, the governors or the C of E education department, we moved to get their story into the media, and they were interviewed in various places, including on GB News. This is all part of our ongoing campaign to raise public awareness over this. So the book that Nikki and Calvin objected to was called It Feels Good to Be Yourself. Along with many other similar books, this is being used to indoctrinate children into believing that they have an inner gender identity which may be other than their biological sex. Apart from being wholly unscientific, these ideas are based on very stereotypical ideas of sex and gender. That princesses, books, ponies are for girls who should only wear pretty dresses, and that climbing trees and fighting is what boys should do. And if you don't fit into those stereotypes, then it's telling you that you may in fact be inside the other sex. So the consequence of this kind of material being taught to children is clear for all to see all around us. But just one example, this slide shows the ballooning of the number of young people, quotes, identifying as bisexual since 2014. So you can see that there's been basically a near tripling in the number. Now, the good news is that sex education is currently subject to a sorely needed government review. So we need to pray that the government will really understand what's happening and that they will make changes. So secondly, it won't have escaped your notice that the month, formerly known as June, seems to have been renamed as Pride Month. In the last couple of years, many schools, including primary schools, have decided to start celebrating it in school. Pride is, of course, an inherently political movement. Peter Tatchell has called it political activism with a carnival-like atmosphere. It celebrates the Stonewall riots of 1969. It's not synonymous with people who identify as LGBT+, and not everyone who considers them part of that community supports it, and people who are not, do not. As many as half of all schools may be marking Pride Month in 2024, and many will also be marking its cousin, which is called Gay History Month, which used to be called February. So this is Izzy Montague. Back in 2018, her son's school held a Pride Month parade, and he was 4 at the time, little Isaiah. The children were expected to march around, wave rainbow flags, and sing songs that are widely recognised as gay anthems. She was refused authorisation to remove her son when she asked for it, and she was treated with utter disdain by the school leadership for the stand that she took. And she contacted Christian Legal Centre, and we helped her to sue the school for discrimination for the way that they had treated her. But unfortunately, she lost her claim when it finally came to court earlier this year. But we think the decision is wrong, and it's being appealed. So watch this space. So the third area, transgenderism. Probably as was said by the moderator just now, probably the most significant issue that is facing us in this area. One of the consequences of the secularization of society is confusion about identity.
Yes, confused.
When we fail to recognize the Creator, it means that our young people are starting to be encouraged to look inside themselves, to work out who they are, even encouraged to ask themselves whether they are in fact male or female. Our culture is trying to break down boundaries all the time, not least in this area of sex and gender. The notion of gender fluidity is popular, and it's encroaching in many areas of life. If you have concerns about this and you're brave enough to raise them in the workplace or at school, you're likely to be punished. So this is Nigel and Sally Rowe. They live on the Isle of Wight, and they raised concerns about what was going on in their local COV primary school 4 years ago. And what was happening was that there was a boy in the class who would come to school one day as a boy, and so their son, was 6 at the time. The boy would come to school one day as a boy and one day as a girl, and he would do that sort of as he chose, and the school was supporting him in doing that. So Christian Legal Centre helped them to take the Department of Education to court, and we recently got granted permission for a judicial review of what was going on. There was a lot of work involved in that and a contested hearing, so that was a great success, which we were very pleased about. And we, thank you. We hope that the Department of Education are taking this seriously. So here is an example of the kind of material that can be being used in schools in this area to teach children. So the gender unicorn here. We believe that this really matters. I can see that you think that as well. Puberty very often will provide a natural cure to gender confusion, probably in over 88% of cases. We should not be locking children into this path before puberty, but rather help them to manage their feelings of gender confusion and encourage and help them to accept their sexed bodies. So I'd like to introduce you now to a few of the teachers that we've been working with. So this is Bernard Randall. He's a reverend in the Church of England and a committed teacher. And he was sacked from his role as a school chaplain about 4 years ago now, after a sermon he gave. And in the sermon, it was an orthodox sermon preaching biblical truth, but he made a heavy emphasis, because it was in school, on tolerating one another. And he told children that they must make up their own minds about these things, and that they could make up their own minds about things including LGBT plus ideology. It was actually very temperate. I don't know if you saw it, it was actually published in the Daily Mail, which we think is the first time that a full sermon has ever been published in the Daily Mail. And his words were considered offensive and harmful, and in this culture he'd gone too far, so he was sacked. But his fight for justice goes on. He lost at the Employment Tribunal level, and we're taking it to an appeal now at the EAT. So please pray for that, for success for him and for justice for him. So this is Hannah. Not her real name, but she's a primary teacher who was sacked after challenging school policy that involved unquestioning affirmation of a 7-year-old child as the other sex at school. And to do this, the school had to silence everybody about the situation. No one was allowed to know that she was actually a girl and not a boy. And that included, the parents, all the staff, the parents at the school, etc. And it required everyone to go along with this sort of delusion that the child was under. With our help, she raised safeguarding concerns with persuasive expert evidence that we presented of potential harm. And we presented it to the governors and then to the local authority. And then when we got, no one took any notice, we tried to challenge it by judicial review in the courts. And as a result of that, Hannah was sacked, and she was reported to the Teaching Regulation Authority for an alleged breach of confidentiality. But this was because she was looking at the child's records, which she actually had access to, and there's really nothing wrong with doing that. But her name, the name of the school, and the child's name were kept anonymous throughout. So this is a very important case, and it's ongoing, as I say, because it goes straight to the heart of how prepubescent children exhibiting gender distress should best be helped. But Hannah's motivated by faith. She believes that we were created male and female, and that girls cannot become boys. She was seriously concerned for the welfare of the child concerned and felt unable to be complicit in what was going on. It's a privilege to help her and walk alongside her. So here's Joshua Sutcliffe. young maths teacher, and this is him on the front of the Daily Telegraph Saturday magazine on the left-hand side there. He was recently struck off the roll of teachers, so he can't work as a teacher anymore in a school, after a chain of events, starting with a Bible club that he started in the Catholic school where he worked. And in his professional disciplinary hearing, there was a great emphasis on his so-called misgendering of a 15-year-old girl who wished to be treated as a boy. And then Christy Higgs, very shy and quiet, unassuming lady. She lost her job as a teaching assistant in a primary school because she shared a post on Facebook warning parents about the material promoting transgenderism that was being used in the reception year. There's an ongoing legal battle for justice for her, which has now reached the Employment Appeal Tribunal. And the case is going particularly slowly because on 2 occasions we had to apply to the court to have lay members of the Employment Appeal Tribunal panel recused because they were obviously biased.
Yes.
So in the middle there you can see a picture of one of the chaps that was due to be on the panel, lay member of the panel, and there he is at some kind of rally wearing his t-shirt which says on it, "Never surrender to a narrow view of gender." He calls himself, he likes to be called MX instead of Mr. or Mrs. And he was very public on social media about his views and about transphobes, etc. And it was very clear that Christy Higgs fell very much within, the people he would consider to be transphobic. But he didn't see fit to tell the judge that he clearly was, shouldn't be hearing the case. And so, thank God we found out about him and we managed to, he had the ignominy of being forced to step down for appearance of bias. But people aren't even realising the bias that they have, and that actually happened twice in the same case, which is quite really extraordinary. So, I want to say a little bit now about the legal position, because I want you to be equipped to understand, as parents and grandparents, what you can do in your schools. So, in the last few years, the government has introduced new regulations making relationships education mandatory in primary schools, and also relationships and sex education mandatory in secondary schools. This is a new thing because it was not mandatory before. Obviously, many schools used to teach it, but a lot of primary schools didn't, or they didn't until right at the end of primary school. So that's added to the existing equality duty, which already is owed by schools in law, which means they have to make sure that all protected characteristics are treated fairly. And that obviously includes those of religious belief as well as those who are gay or transgender. So this area of education, so when you get a letter from back from school, you'll see it being referred to as, now it's called RSHE, Relationships, Sex and Health Education. So what's important to note is that there's no statutory obligation on primary schools to teach sex education at all. They're obliged to teach relationships education, but this is supposed to be a different thing. So they're not obliged to, but they are obliged to teach about relationships, which does include same-sex marriage, because that's the law of the land, and they are required to indicate that other legal forms of family now exist other than a married mother and father. But the problem has arisen because the dividing line between so-called relationships education and sex education has become very blurred. It's not defined anywhere, really. And so schools have sort of erred on the side of caution because it's now a legal requirement. And material has been moving across into the relationships education side. And what's important about that is that parents have no right of opt-out to the relationships education part of the curriculum. And so this is what Nick Gibbs said back in 2019 when this law was changed. And actually, just as an aside, this is the reason why schools are getting outside providers to come in and teach sex education, because it became mandatory. Before that, very often, if they were dealing with it, they would do it themselves. But What's important is that the overarching statutory framework in the area of parental rights is remaining and is very clear. So, these are the two little bits of law that I want you to remember. So, the Education Act 1996, Section 9, parent power. So, schools are required to have regard to the general principle that pupils are to be educated in accordance with the wishes of their parents. And this is also actually something that is part of European law, brought into our law by the Human Rights Act. So Protocol 1, Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights. I'm going to read the whole thing out, it's very important. In the exercise of any functions which it assumes in relation to education to teaching, the state shall respect the right of parents to ensure such education and teaching is in conformity with their own religious and philosophical convictions. So you have parent power.
Yes.
It's a legal requirement that schools in England respect and neither undermine nor interfere with your ability to raise your children in accordance with your Christian worldview.
Yes.
So this is what we've got to hold on to as parents and bear in mind when we consider the material being pushed onto our children. So, what are your actual on-the-ground rights? You've got your overarching rights, so don't forget, but you've also got these other two rights. Your rights apply to relationships education and RSHE in two distinct ways. The right of opt-out. So this is your absolute right to withdraw your children from certain lessons. In the past, this was a nearly unconditional right. But as I said, now that relationships education has become mandatory, there is no right of withdrawal in relation to that. But legally speaking, the government's obligations under the Human Rights Act mean that it does not have the right to prevent you from withdrawing your children where the subject matter at hand is such as to proselytise your children, have a tendency to do that on moral issues in a way that infringes on your right to raise them in accordance with your own religious convictions. So this also applies in secondary schools where sex education, which is supposed to be mandatory there, is being taught in a particularly dogmatic or aggressive way. So it's for you to work out whether you think that this material is doing that. And if it is, you need to raise it, despite the fact that you might not have an absolute right to opt out. But you do also have an important right, which is to be consulted. Excuse me. Schools are required to have a written policy on their relationships education and RSE, and they're required to consult you as parents in developing those policies. And they should also, in this process, they should provide you with examples of the teaching materials they're using. These are all statutory requirements. So as parents, you are required to be consulted in a meaningful way about your children's curriculum in this area. So what this means is you can go to school and you can ask to see their policies and to see the material that is going to be delivered to your children. So if your child attends a school with a Christian ethos, like a Church of England school, it's also accepted by the guidance that materials can be taught in a manner that does not compromise the Christian ethos of the school. So it is up to the schools individually to decide what to deliver. And it's quite legal for them to decide to, for example, heavily promote abstinence as part of their sex education programme, if that's in line with your ethos. So what can you do? I suggest that we need to become Issachar people for the sake of our children. I'm sure you know about the Old Testament tribe of Issachar in 1 Chronicles 12. They were the ones who understood the times and therefore knew how Israel should respond. You as parents are the primary influencers over your children. Teach your children the gospel story. From their earliest days, help them to understand the story that they are part of. Pray over them and gently lead them into understanding this as their identity, as part of the family of God. Prayer is our primary and overarching advice. Bring this issue to our Father God, who cares more about your children and leading them into truth than you ever could. But there are underneath there some practical ideas. So getting engaged with what's going on, that's the first thing. Know what's going on. Start the process. If you have a problem, you've got an issue with it, start the process in the least confrontational way possible. Try not to do it by email, try to do it personally, so that the school can understand how passionate you feel about these things. Know your school policies. You know your rights now, I told you just now. You know your rights in the law. Escalate it. If you don't get what you want from the from the class teacher, escalate it to the head and the head teacher, etc. Don't be afraid to report it to Ofsted, the local authority, and the safeguarding person, and the multi-academy trust, or even the Department of Education. Get help. That's what we're here for at Christian Concern. Get in touch with us and our education team. And so other ideas here about becoming an Issachar people. Just so you can think a bit more widely about things. I said about parents' prayerful influence, your influence in school. Have you thought about home education? Increasingly, parents are recognising this calling. Obviously, it's very sacrificial and in some ways a luxury, but is that something that you could do for your children? There is a new independent schools, Christian schools movement. There are new communities springing up all over the country. In the last 40 years, there have been many, many new schools.
Yes.
Is there an independent Christian school near you? They're not free, unfortunately, but often they're not too expensive. Is there one of those near you? Do you feel called to start one yourself? We've got some packs at the back. If anyone thinks they might feel called to that would be fantastic. At the moment in the education team, Steve is overseeing about 20 groups who are currently starting their own schools. And are you a teacher? Do you know a teacher in the state or the independent sector? They're there to be salt and light. Encourage them to be brave. And other education organisations you can get involved with, where other passionate Christians are there to encourage you. Talk to your churches and your church leaders. Help them to wake up to these issues, to help the parents in your congregations. So we've got lots of resources as Christian Concern. Look on our website and have a look at the articles that are regularly there. And at the back, Andrew, do you want to wave at me, Andrew? Andrew at the back, he's got a table and he's got some material that you can take. So what I really want to say to finish is that this is a spiritual battle.
Yes.
It's not a struggle against flesh and blood, is it? No. It's against the authorities and the powers in the spiritual realm. And we're instructed, aren't we, to pray for those in authority, so we must be doing this. And pray for our nation, pray for our children, the next generation. There is a faithful remnant who will not compromise and will stand up for truth.
Yes.
And a whole load of them are right here in front of me here, which is fantastic. So I do want to invite you to join our community that is Christian Concern. It's an exciting and vibrant community, just like yours here, and we would love you all to be part of it. So you can see there that we send a weekly email every week, and it doesn't take long to read, and it just updates you about what we're doing and what's happening in the nation in relation to all these issues, and how it encourages you to engage. So I'd love it if you would all sign up to get that. So there's a QR code up there, and Andrew's got something you can sign at the back. Also, if you don't get a chance to do that, our website, www.christianconcern.com. Have a look there, and you can also sign up there. So finally, and to close, how does a nation thrive? Love, justice, truth, and freedom. Of Issachar, men who had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. So I believe, I hope that I've encouraged you to, I've equipped you a little bit, and I've encouraged you now to engage more about this issue. Thank you so much for listening. We're really looking forward to you answering the questions that you have, the things that are on your heart, which we might be able to answer about this area. So obviously ask the legal questions to me, and then the medical ones I'll send over to Dr. Abel. And we've also got the social worker here, which is great. So I think I'm just going to, yes, hand back to the moderator. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was